Okay, good morning, His Grace, Most Reverend Father Julian Liao, Archbishop of Kuala Lumpur, Father Philip Chua, Ecclesiastical Director of the Archdiocesan Mental Health Ministry, Father Paul Cheong, Parish Priest of the Church of St. Francis of Assisi, Reverend Priests, distinguished speakers of the workshops and panelists, guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Archdiocesan Mental Health Ministry, in collaboration with the Beacon of Hope, St. Francis of Assisi, I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all of you to the World Mental Health Day 2022. Before we proceed with the program for today, I would just like to make a few general announcements. Please observe silence and reverence inside the church, especially when the talks are delivered here. Have your phones on silent mode. Wear your masks properly, covering the nose and mouth at all times. Please wear your name tags. Eating and smoking are not permissible in the church, hall, and the workshop rooms, except drinking mineral water. Any rubbish or waste is to be disposed of in the bins provided. Please help to keep the church compound clean. Thank you. Without further ado, we shall now watch the video for the World Mental Health Day 2022. I would now like to invite His Grace, Most Reverend Julian Liao, Archbishop of Kuala Lumpur, together with Reverend Father Philip and Reverend Father Paul, to the sanctuary for the opening ceremony. Let's welcome. thank the Archbishop of Kuala Lumpur, His Grace Most Reverend Julian Liao, for his support for the World Mental Health Day 2022. The Archbishop will now recite an opening prayer followed by his opening speech. Thank you, Father Philip and Father Paul. You can take your seats now.
Dear friends, shall we stand for our opening prayer? In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Dear Heavenly Father, we are ever grateful to you for gathering us here this morning on this World Day of Mental Health. We come together as one humanity. We come as members of your family, the human fraternity, wounded, distressed, broken, unwell. Holy and loving God, help us to lift mental illness out of the shadows and into the light, to talk openly about things that are so often whispered, and to confront the stigmas that keep people from dealing honestly with matters that are more common than we might care to acknowledge. Give us determination and persistence as we strive to create safe spaces for all peoples, especially our own family members, including those with mental health challenges, fleeting or lasting. And give us courage and wisdom to keep the conversation alive, realizing that they are us, and to make that meaningful and helpful for all. We ask this in the name of the one who loves us all, no matter who we are or where we are on life's journey. And we make this our prayer through Christ our Lord. Please be seated, dear friends. My dear brothers and sisters, you may have seen the first slide just now on that video. Probably a bit too fast. Cannot read. I think it said more than 450 million people are suffering from mental health issues in the world. But statistics in our own country before the pandemic says that almost 500,000 Malaysians, 500,000, are already encountering symptoms of mental health, especially depression. This was before the pandemic. I'm not sure what the figures are today. Probably double, triple. And we are only about 33 million. So mental health issues are part and parcel of our daily lives, especially post-pandemic, even more so post-pandemic. And I have some statistics that says over the last 20 years, mental health statistics have tripled, and are expected to adversely impact the Malaysian economy to about more than 25 trillion in 2030. And I believe in 2020, there were more than 1,000 suicide attempts recorded in our country. More than 1,000. And in the 6 months of that year, there were 266 who succeeded and took their lives. Almost 300 of our Malaysians. And what is more shocking, my dear friends, is that more than half of all mental health disorders begins at the tender age of 14, 1-4. And 3/4 of these cases are by the mid-20s. So it is affecting our young more than the adults. Perhaps not because we do not have issues, not because we do not experience mental disorders as adults, but because the younger ones may not have the coping mechanisms. The younger ones are not able to address or even acknowledge that they have issues. So, my dear friends, the theme mental health in an unequal world further highlights the inequalities among peoples. There is so much of inequality in the world, I think we don't have to mention, but we know in respect to financial incomes, our ethnicity, race, gender, religion perhaps, our sexual orientation, and all these factors come in the way of addressing mental health issues. And I think we all know COVID did not discriminate whether we are young or old or rich or poor, whatever faith, whatever race. The virus affects everyone. So does mental health issues. It affects everybody here in this church and beyond. And as I mentioned, all of us have some sort of mental health issue. And perhaps the definition of what mental health issues are may not be what we think. Even anxiety, depression, simple things, overly worried, these things are also categorized as having mental issues. So it's more than just what we think, those that need to go to certain places to be treated. It is more prevalent. If we are unable to lead a normal life, if we are not able to cope with the stresses of life adequately, then we are encountering some sort of mental health issues. And that includes you and me. And so, my dear friends, these issues, the lockdown, the last 2 to 3 years, have impacted individuals, especially those living on their own. People in residential care homes, nursing homes, and especially those who are already experiencing mental health issues. As I mentioned, today we see how these mental health have affected the young and affected their education, being disrupted, online studies, not able to come to school, to mingle, to mix. So many issues that we do not know what are the medium-term to long-term effects. However, my dear friends, are we ready to tackle these issues in our own families, in our own communities? And how do we tackle, how do we face these issues that all of us will encounter, have encountered, struggling to cope? I hope today's workshops, today's inputs by our eminent speakers will able to give us some tools, will help us to know how we can cope and how to develop resilience against these stresses and pressures of daily life so that we can function at an optimal level without compromising our well-being. Mental health has to be treated equally, if not more, to physical health. We spend so much time perhaps exercising, doing all sorts of qigong and walks and different kinds of exercises for our physical well-being. Father Paul combines not just physical, even emotional, spiritual, and let us add mental health too in this repertoire of concerns we have. As human beings, we are made up of all these parts: our psychological, our mental, emotional, spiritual, physical, and all these areas make us human, must be in harmony, must be addressed adequately. And I hope with today's theme on inequality in dealing with mental health, especially among different kinds of people, we are able to bridge these inequalities, and especially the stigma that is associated with mental health. And perhaps that may be the greatest obstacle in people addressing these issues, trying to perhaps even say, I have no problem, I am okay, I'm able to cope, but in reality, we are not coping. And if a wound is not treated, if it's just covered, if it is just hidden away, it festers, it becomes infected. And if it's not given the proper treatment, medicine, we may find we may have to amputate if it becomes gangrenous. Let us not wait till the wounds are not treatable. Let us not cover up and think that these issues will disappear. But let us pray for the courage, the grace to face these issues straight on, to seek the necessary help from professionals that are trained in these areas of mental health. And I want to thank Father Philip and his team, the mental health ministry of the Archdiocese and beyond, for the many speakers who have shared their experiences, their expertise, their knowledge to help us to cope, to recognize first that we have mental health issues that needs to be addressed. And let us pray today, my dear friends, that we will not shy away. We will not hide the problems that exist in ourselves, our own mental health, in our families. And I know, I have seen families hiding as if their child did not exist, perhaps shielding them from society, perhaps for fear, for not understanding mental health is more common than we think. And perhaps unfounded shame that is preventing us from reaching out to helping that individual and even to help ourselves as family members who are coping, who are struggling to even accept mental health issues in the family. So I pray today's gathering, today's coming together will be a time of awareness as we listen and as we open our hearts to address these issues. And there are many groups, there are many organizations who are addressing these issues in our society, even in our own churches, even in different faiths. Let us know where these resources are and let us continue to make use of them for the benefit of those who have these challenges. And so I would like to conclude by saying that people living with mental health challenges just want to be understood, to be respected, to be treated with loving kindness. Such kindness is the essence of healing, the substance of the promise that Jesus gives life and gives life to the full. Mental health ministry means finding a way to exhibit some extraordinary human kindness, loving kindness. And the church is this sanctuary, this place where we can come to pray, to worship, to find peace, to find understanding, to find loving kindness. There is tremendous power and beauty in the suggestion that the church is called to be a specialist in this human kindness. Small acts of kindness, of tenderness, of thoughtfulness, of caring for one another will bring the healing that we all need. And I just want to conclude by saying we need more professionals. We need more psychologists, psychiatrists, people in the mental health ministry, because there is so much that needs to be done. The harvest is great, the laborers are few. So my young people, those of you who are here, I challenge you, if you want to do something for humanity, for your fellow human beings, for their well-being, do consider a career in mental health issues dealing with real human need. And those of you who are already in this mental health line, remember, as healers, we also need healing. We need to be wounded healers. We need to be healers who have gone through pain and suffering ourselves, so that we know and we are able to acknowledge our own need before we can minister to others. We need to be strengthened, we need to be healthy before we can offer help to others. So don't neglect your own mental health, my dear mental health ministers, volunteers. Do not neglect your own health, because you are even greater prone to these issues as you look at them, as you deal with them every day. And you too need the healing. You too need the supervisors in your ministries to also bounce things off sounding boards. You also need to have debriefing sessions so that you do not get caught up too in this cycle of issues that may not be addressed in your own life. So thank you, dear brothers and sisters, and those who have made the effort to come. May today's gathering, workshops, talks be meaningful, be helpful to each one of you, and may you in turn also share this knowledge that you have today with others to help them also to cope. And let me just conclude by saying, may the grace that says you are not alone encourage you. May the mercy that says you are enough comfort you. And may the love that says you are loved embrace you this day and every day of your lives. God bless you.
Thank you, Archbishop, for a very reflective and compassionate opening speech. We shall now have our first talk for the day. Before I invite the speaker, Dr. Gerard Lewis, to come forward, it is my pleasure to introduce him. Dr. Gerard has been involved in the field of education, counseling, and training for over 30 years. He has spent over 10 years in educational leadership in mission, private, and international schools in Malaysia. He has been with the Help Education Group for the last 21 years. He is currently the CEO of the Help Education Services and Help International School, as well as a Pro-Vice Chancellor, Wellbeing, and the Dean of the Faculty of Behavioral Sciences, Education and Languages at Help University. He is also the advisor to the Archdiocesan Mental Health Ministry. Dr. Gerard is a counseling psychologist by training. He is also a counselor, educator, and has extensive experience in the training, supervision, and development of both professional counselors and counselors in training. I now invite Dr. Gerard to deliver a talk entitled, "What is World Mental Health Day?" Let's welcome him.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. what did I do? Okay. Your Grace, Father Philip, Father Paul, friends. Just a quick one. How many of you here are professional mental health practitioners? Just a show of hands. Okay, and the rest are volunteers, people who are interested in the field of mental health. Yeah. So first of all, thank you for the invitation, Father Philip, for the honor of speaking in this first session. And thank you, Your Grace, for promoting mental health and promoting psychiatrists, psychologists. Let me add counselors. That's who we are. Social workers, and all of those who work in this. And often, when a priest goes up to the pulpit and uses the phrase, "The harvest is rich, but the laborers are few," he means to actually recruit priests and religious. So it's nice to have that phrase also now included into the priest and religious category. There are few mental health practitioners. So if you've got children who want to get into the field of mental health, please encourage them. Yeah. His Grace also talked about the stigma of mental illness. Yeah. And I don't know whether you are in my generation or not. When I was growing up and we get angry with someone, we say, "Go to Tanjung Rambutan." Do you remember that? We have two very famous towns in the cities in Malaysia, Tanjung Rambutan, and what's the other one? There you go. Tanjung Rambutan and Tampoy, not famous for its food, but famous for its roof built over the whole town. Actually, it's Hospital Bahagia, because those two towns are where we have our psychiatric hospitals. Yeah, but that's it. The stigma. So much so that people who are actually from the town itself, who don't have a mental illness, or don't live in the hospital, who are not patients in the hospital, they're almost embarrassed to say, "I'm from Tanjung Rambutan." Yeah, they will say, "I'm from a town outside of Ipoh." So why the stigma? Why this stigma? So I'm glad that today we have the opportunity to talk a little bit about mental well-being, mental health and well-being. And you notice the focus is really on that. What is right with us rather than what is wrong with us. So often when we talk about mental illness, it's as if, it's worse than cancer, right? Cancer is terminal, but you got mental health, the embarrassment, the shame, don't wash dirty linen in public. And because of that, we don't go out to seek help. And just like any other physical illness, a lot of mental, psychological, emotional problems can be dealt with quite easily if we address it early on, rather than wait for it to become a full-blown depression or mood disorder or full-blown mental illness. Yeah. So let's begin. This first part of the session is just to talk about what is World Mental Health Day. This year we celebrate the 30th anniversary of World Mental Health Day. It was started in 1992, for those of you who like a bit of history. And over the years, the focus really has been to put a spotlight on the need and the importance of mental health. Yeah, you can just Google. Actually, I was a little confused. I didn't get a chance to ask Father Philip. World Mental Health Day is normally on October the 10th. And the theme for this year's Mental Health Day, which is October the 10th, is making mental health a priority and accessible to the whole world. But the theme today that we have, that will be the focus of my talk, then my next talk will be mental health in an unequal world. That's the theme for 2021 Mental Health Day. But nevertheless, they are all interconnected. The focus really is this, to make it as accessible to as many people as possible. And we ask ourselves though, not just to raise awareness, but to be able to make mental health accessible suggests that it is not so accessible to a whole lot of people. Why have this as a priority if you are sick, anybody can go to a doctor? You can go to a hospital if you're not, if you're Malaysian, and you'll be able to get some access to physical health. But if you've got a mental illness, who do you see? Where do you go? And if you want to see a professional outside, it's quite costly. So how accessible really for those who really have serious mental health issues or just need to talk to someone, how accessible are those services to the vast majority or to every single person that requires it? And the answer is not very accessible. And that's why the need for us to constantly look at ways and means to be able to provide that kind of support for those who need it. And that's why the efforts of the Archdiocesan Mental Health Team, I remember 3-4 years ago, they were just a fledgling little center, and I think thanks to the support of the Archdiocese, they've now grown to quite a center of significance. They provide a lot of regular talks on mental health, various issues related to mental health, and a lot of good counseling services also there. Yeah? It's such an important dimension of who we are as human beings that is part of the 17 UN Sustainable Goals, yeah, 2030 Sustainable Goals. I think some of you may be familiar with this. That you will see if you look at, there's no little dot there. If you look at goal number 3, health and well-being is one of the 17 goals, where the focus really is to allow as many people or to provide services to every single human person in the world, right? And as Archbishop mentioned, COVID-19, despite all the best efforts to provide this, COVID-19 has slowed things down a little bit. Here are some interesting stats that are there. Other than just the physical health, and all of us went through the last 2 years. There's a saying these days, if you don't know anybody who has got COVID-19, you don't have a lot of friends. Yeah, many of you yourselves may have gotten it, and thankfully, you got it post the vaccine. And many of us also know of people who had COVID-19 prior to the vaccine rollout, and many of our friends who had passed away because of that. So just try and imagine the loss that people experience, just like a lot of people when they heard the news of the passing of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II a few days ago. That sadness, the grief, which is a normal part of any human experience. Yeah? But if you lose someone that is closer to home, a spouse, a child, a parent, what is the impact on us emotionally, psychologically? For some people, they find it difficult to get out of it. And if you are the only breadwinner of the family, what happens to that person, to that the family that is left behind? What is the emotional impact on that person? So a lot of people, after the loss of someone, go through grief that is not your usual grief. It takes a long time for them to recover. So if you imagine just one death, but look at the stats because of COVID-19, 15 million deaths in the world, 15. And because of that, the increase in the prevalence of anxiety and depression. I'll show you some stats later about what the ratios are post-pandemic. Yeah, what are the increase in anxiety and depression. The pandemic has really set back the agenda of the UN goals, so much so the Secretary General said this, we must rise higher to rescue the Sustainable Development Goals and stay true to our promise of a world of peace, dignity, and prosperity on a healthy planet. So the need really, as we come out of the pandemic, to continue to be vigilant, to continue to ask ourselves if we respect the dignity of every human person. And the dignity of every human person includes not just our right to have a voice, right to vote, right to freedom, right to education, etc., but also a right to mental health services. And if those services are not available, and if the result of my own mental illness is because of inequalities that happen in society, what is it that you and I have to do? Okay, and I'll talk more about that in my next session, yeah? So we talk about mental health, but let's ask ourselves the question, what is mental health? A lot of people think of mental health as crazy, huh? Gone crazy, mental illness, yeah? Person is crazy, etc. No, if you look at this, person who is mentally healthy is basically that includes all aspects. So Archbishop talked about this. It's not just physical health. Just think of the last time you felt sick. So when you're sick physically, we get irritated quite easily. Yeah, especially if you're not well and there's a lot of noise going around. People are talking, children are running around. We get upset quite easily, yeah. So when we go through any kind of physical pain, there will always be the emotional, psychological aspects of us, because the mind, body, spirit are all connected, right? And when we are even spiritually in pain or spiritually lost, there will be that impact on the whole person. So the physical health is not divorced or separated from our mental, psychological, emotional health, right? So when you look at the definition, it includes our emotional, psychological, social well-being. It affects how we think, how we act, how we feel, how we behave. It helps us handle stress. So life is stressful. Whatever happens in life, there are many things. Every time we make a decision, sometimes can be stressful, depending on what the nature of the decision is. Whether it's our children's education, whether it's our children wanting to get married, or having a boyfriend that we don't approve of, or girlfriend that you don't approve of, or where am I going to find my next meal for the day? All of those are very stressful situations, yeah? And so it affects every facet, every aspect of our lives. And if this is what mental health is, then we have to ask, what is it that affects that? What affects that? When you look at the global events of the last couple of years, from the pandemic to the war in Ukraine, while it seems so far away, is it really that far away? Because of the war in Ukraine, you ask a couple of weeks following that war, what did you notice happen in Malaysia? If you remember the war that was maybe about 6-7 months ago, immediately there was an impact, because one of the first things that they did in terms of sanctions was to stop the petrol supply, the gas supply from Russia to the rest of the world. And immediately what happened to global prices of everything and anything. So you go to your favorite char kway teow stall or your favorite hawker center, suddenly things went up 20 cents. Ukraine, blame it on the Ukrainian, Russians. Everything. So from the war to inflation to the cost of living, and so something that happens in some part of the world impacts on us locally. So it's not just a global event or some event that is separated from us, because we are such an interconnected world in terms of the supply chain, in terms of goods, resources, grain, for example. Ukraine was one of the biggest, if not the biggest, exporter of grain. And so when that supply couldn't come with flour, bread, all of that went up in price. So if we don't have, for some people, that's the only part of their staple diet. If they don't have bread, stressful or not stressful? If you can't find your next meal, which is part of your regular diet, stressful or not stressful? Of course. Can you imagine if that is sustained for a long period of time? How does that impact on a person emotionally, psychologically, if your physical well-being is not taken care of? Okay? So think about climate change, natural disasters. Some of us have gone through the floods in Malaysia. Every time, there's this major flood that rains at 4 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and people are sending you videos of cars floating on the water, people trying to get out of the floods, caught in jams. Imagine if this was a natural occurrence on a regular basis. When you think back of Aceh, 2004, we were part of a team that went and did some work in Kedah in the aftermath of the tsunami. Yeah, and that was really a major Asia-Pacific kind of event. The effects lasted many, many years beyond. Okay, so think of those sort of disasters. I just came back from the Middle East yesterday, and people always think the Middle East is hot, but you don't know hot until you've been to the Middle East in summer. Yeah, it's like, after when you're baking something in an oven, and the oven you set it at about 120 degrees or 40, 45 degrees, you open the oven, you get this blast, this heat wave that comes to you. That's exactly the experience I had. Every time I open the door, I get this heat wave that comes to you. And if you don't have an aircon in the house, it's so hot that by law, I was in Bahrain, that by law, you're not supposed to work past 12 o'clock. So work has to start at 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, until at most 12 o'clock, latest. After that, no more work. Because it's too hot. You open an egg on the pavement, it will fry. That's how hot it is. So can you imagine when you have that kind of change in temperature, when you live in those sort of areas where there's disaster, where there's natural occurrences of natural disasters, what more occurrences that happen as a result of climate change, right? What happens then? Okay, so let's take a look at each one and the impact on our mental health. Pre-pandemic, 1 in 8 globally were living with a mental disorder. Archbishop mentioned some stats just now. Post-pandemic, 25% of the population showed an increase in anxiety and depression. And that's just for COVID-19. How about when it comes to, I put those two things together, the wars, not just in Ukraine, in Afghanistan, in South Sudan, in Myanmar. The list is a very long list in terms of where conflict has happened in the last decade or so. You no need to go 200 years or 50 years. Just in the last 5 to 10 years, in terms of conflict in the different parts of the world. And the most recently, of course, in Ukraine. And not too far away in Myanmar, we've got students studying with us in the university from the country, and we hear stories of what's going on in their own country in terms of safety, security, people walking into your house, walking into the shops and just taking, because they have no food. They have no food. So it reminds me of this opening scene of Les Miserables. I don't know if you know the story of Les Miserables, the John Valjean, who was sent to prison. Why? Because he stole a loaf of bread. Because he was hungry. His family was hungry. He stole that bread because they were so hungry. Right? And so when people are hungry, because there's not enough food, the cat has devalued in such an extent that many people can't afford to have more than one meal a day. Yeah, and so when you are in that kind of social unrest, economic situation because of all the sanctions that happen, what goes on in that community? If you walk on the streets, you don't know whether you'll be mugged, not just by some stranger, but by the soldiers themselves. Yeah, and some of the students who are involved in the institute that we work with, themselves, their families are involved in some resistance with the junta. So just imagine what that kind of environment is like. And it's not that far away. It's people who we ourselves know, right? So when you think about it, here's a study by Levy on health and peace. So in just 2021, 84 million people worldwide were displaced. The food crisis that happens as a result of the war. And if you look at this, if it is not large enough, so the red circle is the conflict, right? Directly affecting, you see the orange circle because of conflicts. You will see infectious disease, nutrition, violence, and mental health that gets affected because of conflict. So just think about what I just said earlier on. Because of wars, because of displacement of people, because of hunger, because of rising costs of living, the direct impact will eventually, inevitably be on our mental health and well-being, right? The indirect, in fact, you will see those outside, yeah? The infrastructure of society, the damage to the fabric of society, the redirection of the resources when there's a displacement of population. So people have to go, move, uproot themselves just to find another place. You see the refugee problem in the Middle East, in South Asia, in parts of the Middle East, in Africa, many of them trying to get into Europe. The refugee problem is a major problem, migrant issues. People from the Philippines moving out to different parts of the world, the Filipino diaspora, because of a lack of resources in their own homes, their own villages, their own cities. So the impact of that displacement on a person, you know, when you do an inventory of stress, right? You do an inventory of stress, one of the top items of most stressful events that happen in a person's life is, you know what? Moving house. Moving house is, if you've ever moved house, I've moved house in the last, about 3 times in the last 5 years. That's why my hair is so white. Moving house or getting married, the same league, one of the most stressful experiences. You have to think about 10,000 things about how to pack here, pack there, and the house is in a mess, and some of us are high need for order, some of us are a little OCD, can't stand a bit of dirt. Don't know what to do already. So we scream and yell at people around us. We say, good morning, what's good about this morning? Can't you see I'm stressed? Why? We are moving house, get everything in order, put the things in boxes. Stressful. Can you imagine if a refugee has to uproot and leave his village? Why? Because there's no food, there's no water. The soldiers are coming to kill you. So in South Sudan, in the different parts where conflict is, in Afghanistan, can you imagine what those people go through? So if we say mental health for all, not just for Malaysians, but because we're all interconnected for everyone in the world. So just try and imagine that kind of impact in the world that we live in today. And finally, climate change. And this was very interesting. This is a mega study. They looked at about 445 papers in different platforms where they publish journals, research. As psychologists, we just do a lot of research. 163 of the 400, so there was a meta-analysis of all the studies done on climate change, natural disasters, and what is the impact on mental health. 163 studies showed that there was a direct impact on the population whenever there's a change because of the changes that are happening in our climate. There's a direct impact not just to public health, but to mental health. So, things that we see, that we read about, and we often don't think about the impact of that on our emotional, psychological well-being. But now I hope that, because of this, you understand now why when we talk about World Mental Health Day, it's not just talking about what can we do to help people with depression and anxiety. We have to go to a deeper question on what are the causes of mental health issues in the world today. Is it just because of personal factors? Is it just because of history of origin? Because my father, grandfather had depression, that's why I can't run away. Also, what to do? Blame my parents because they suffer from depression. If they didn't have a depressive gene, I wouldn't have depression. It's not as simple as that. Is it just those intrapersonal issues? Or is there more that the root causes are in the environment, in the society that we live in the inequalities that are there? And that's what I will talk about in my next session this morning. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. I now invite Father Philip to give a token of appreciation to Dr. Gerard. Thank you, Father Philip. Okay, we shall now have a 15-minute break at the piazza before the commencement of the next talk. So please be back by 10:15. Thank you so much.
Testing.
Thank you everyone for coming back on time. We shall now have the next talk. Dr. Gerard Lewis will be talking on mental health in an unequal world, which is a theme for the Mental Health Day today.
Thanks. What time do I have until again? 11:15. Okay. Okay. Let's try and make this a little interactive today. There will be some parts where I will get you into some discussion with the people around you. I hope when that happens, you do engage a little bit. So I have to do a little bit of a disclaimer. I am not a sociologist, neither am I an anthropologist or an economist or a politician. I'm just a counseling psychologist. But because a lot of what I'm going to talk about certainly has got, you will require some expertise. And it was just as much as a learning experience for me preparing today's session on this topic of mental health in an unequal world. So let's start. Unequal. So just a quick summary again of what mental health is. So when you think about this, impacts how we act, think, feel, behave, how we handle stress, how we make decisions, how we make choices, and how our emotional, psychological, social well-being are all interconnected, our physical well-being and all interconnected. Given that, we ask that question, unequal in what way? Let me just start off just with one first. Let's talk about income inequalities, yeah? And then after that, I'll move on to some other inequalities and show the relationship between the inequality that exists in our communities, in our society today, and how that impacts and affects mental health. The UN Human Development Report, this is a old stats, 2004, but that already gives you some sense of the disparity in income. Yeah? Between the top 10%, this is just Malaysia. Throughout the world, you will have different stats related to this, yeah? Just in Malaysia, based on the UN report, the top 10% in terms of wealth have 38.4% of the share of our wealth in the country, compared to 1.7% that is shared by the bottom 10%. The rest of us are the remaining almost 50% of the middle income group, right? That takes care of the rest of the pie. But look at the bottom 10%. 1.7% of the wealth of the nation is shared by them. But the top 10% owns so much of the wealth of the country. So when you're rich, you get richer. That's basically what this stat shows. The more recent, this is from The Age, July 22nd, I forget the date, 2022. This is just last 2 months ago. There was this headline, rising prices, rising inequality. And some interesting analysis from the economists here is just that looking at the three categories, so your B40, your M40, and your T20, your top 20%, right? So your bottom 20% in terms of, okay, if I take home 100 ringgit every day, the bottom 20% will spend 24 ringgit and 20 cents. The top 10% will spend 1 ringgit or 12 ringgit and 60 cents. Meaning that what I bring home if I'm in the top 20%, I have more to do other things. Right? I have more to spend on other things, whether on my leisure, my holidays overseas, my children's education, and my savings for my retirement. You know, I can save some money, put in some investment fund somewhere. But B40, big difference. Yeah, not that much left. The take-home income is even more telling. Yeah, for the B40, the take-home income, if you earn after spending on everything, what I have left in terms of the total cumulative income is only 16%. Out of every 100 ringgit, I only have 16 ringgit to take home. Compared with those in the top 20%, who would have almost half of what they earn, they're able to take home and then do all of the different things, yeah, for their savings, etc. Just think of that impact for a minute. If I have more, then I can afford more. I can do more, right? So I never have to worry. My children never have to worry about moving up the ladder. There was also a stats there on how the pandemic impacted on average wages. Yeah, and it's in the middle and the bottom 40% that had salary cuts. A lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of people had to take salary cuts. But the top 20%, even if they did have salary cuts, didn't impact them as much. Because when you have a lot, if you earn 1 million ringgit, what is 10,000 ringgit, 50,000 ringgit in terms of salary cuts? Yeah, a month. Doesn't impact on you at all. But if I earn a 1,000 or 2,000 ringgit, and I have a 5 to 10% salary cut, and look at how much money I have to spend on so many other things, and if you've got a bigger family, that makes it even more difficult. Then think of the impact on my emotional, social, psychological well-being. Think of the impact on my children's education, and I'll talk about some of the rural-urban divide, etc. Yeah? So, here's an interesting study. And this is a global study, another very big study, looking at the disparity of income between the top 20% and the bottom 20% of the 23 richest countries in the world. Right? So we are not talking about average income. We are talking about the disparity, the inequality between the very rich and the very poor. Right? And what you will see, let me just try and make sense to you. Those that are closer to the x-axis, so you see the x-axis, the intercept, sorry, maths teacher, the intercept between the x and the y-axis, you see a 2 and a 0, minus 0, 1.0, right? So 2 means the gap between the very rich and the very poor is small, right? The higher you go on the x-axis, the horizontal axis, moving towards 10, the higher the gap between rich and poor. And then as you go up the y-axis, which is the negative 0.1, 0.5, 0 to 0.5. So you look at index of child well-being. So when you say it is negatively correlated, so countries like Japan, Scandinavian countries, Finland, Norway, Slovenia, Denmark, Germany, Belgium, those countries, when the disparity is small, well-being of the child is high. As you move down the index, and when the disparity is larger, heading towards 8, 9, 10, so countries like the US, actually Singapore is also there, towards the disparity of income, yeah? But it's not seen here. Portugal, Australia, New Zealand, Israel, the UK. When the disparity is great between the top 10% and the bottom 10% or the 20%, then the well-being of children are at greater risk. Right? So conclusion, it's not about improving the economy in terms of average income. The conclusion is we must reduce the gap between rich and poor. Because when they looked at the average income, there was no relationship between the well-being. Because average income is a very misleading statistics. When you put a lot of very rich people there that own about 30-40% of the economy, with a very big number of people that own very little, your average, of course, will increase. And that is not a true reflection of how average incomes impact. Because the studies, these big studies, didn't show any relationship between average income, but it showed a negative relationship when the disparity in income inequalities was great. I hope that's making sense, yeah? I know some of us have an aversion for statistics, but bear with me. So that's just one sense of an inequality, just income inequality and how that impacts others. How about ethnic, if you're an ethnic minority, yeah, religious minority, all of us here in many ways in Malaysia, we are minorities. If you are Chinese, Indian, Kadazan, indigenous people, we are all minorities. Yeah, the majority would be our Malay Muslim friends. What happens if you are a minority in Europe? If you are black, if you are Hispanic, if you are from the Caribbean, if you know from Africa, you are a minority. What happens in those countries where there are ethnic minorities? Even in African countries, if you're from a certain tribe, what happens then? We know of the couple of years ago the big massacres between the Hutu and the I forget the Hutu and there was another tribe that were in conflict, and so the majority slaughtered the minority. Yeah, gender norms, male versus female, right? I was recently, reacquainted because of the House of Dragon, yeah, Game of Thrones, House of Dragon. So I was watching the old Game of Thrones again, trying to catch up, and the male heir, right? If you are male, I mean, even in many parts of the world until today, if you are female, God has not blessed me, God has cursed me. Why a female? Another female, another female, another female. 5 females in my family, there are 7 children. First 5 were girls. My father slept on the couch after the 5th. For 6 months, I was told. Because maybe not meant to be. And then my brother came along. He was number 6. That's why he's got the name God sent in his Chinese name, Chi Tin Loi, God sent. That's why God sent, because a male. I was a bonus. I was number 7. I think they continued trying to have gotten 5 boys after that. But it just goes to show gender inequality. If you are male versus female. Interestingly, I was just reading there was some CNN commentary on the Queen. During her reign, only time in the history of the world, they had 3 female prime ministers. Margaret Thatcher, Karen Truss, and Theresa May. And she was the longest serving monarch, right? She was an exception that there were 3 female prime ministers. In the US, not a single one. What does that tell you? In Malaysia, not a single one. Yeah? How many countries in the world where a female will never be able to rise to the highest office in the land? Why? Because of your gender. So, when you think of gender norms, that inequality, are those decisions made not to put someone up there because of a person's gender? Then it becomes inequity already. Then there's sexism, there's discrimination, etc. Salaries also get impacted because the higher you go, the income is different. Yeah? Rural-urban divide, the inequality. Over the last 2 years, what we realized is that there were many children in our public school system, yeah, especially in the urban centers, that did not go to school for 2 years, believe it or not. Why? Because no internet. And even if there was internet, if there was Wi-Fi that was given by the government, etc., not enough devices. Not enough devices to do any kind of online learning. So one household, 5 children, 4 children, 3 children, father may be the only one that can able to afford the phone. One device that the father needs to use it for his work. How are the children going to study if all lessons are going on at the same time? So for 2 years, they just had no education. That's why the need to go back, even as they had to manage. Can you imagine the impact on a person's well-being when they see all their peers moving up, the people in the cities moving up, those who are international schools, no problem, like the international schools that I manage, no problem, because we all had our Apple devices, learning just continued, etc., as if there was no pandemic. But those in the rural areas didn't have the luxury of owning a device. And therefore, for 2 years, if not more, in many families, in many small towns, urban areas, that famous picture in Sabah of this university student who had to climb on top of the tree just to get a Wi-Fi signal, right? And so it tells you when that divide is there between rich and poor, between urban and rural, how that disadvantages people even more. And of course, then the question is, how does that impact on our mental health? Education, I connected with that, yeah? Whether you are a degree holder, you are a diploma holder, whether you just finished SPM, what difference is there in terms of your salary? Big difference, yeah? Whether I will hire you or not, give you a job, whether you got a degree. If you don't have a degree, then, that's why many parents harass their children to study, because you have to go to university, etc. And what happens if you can't afford to go to university because you don't have the financial means? Because why? Your take-home salary. Now go back to the first income inequality graph that I had. Because can't afford. And many of these kids are good students, but just no opportunity. How did they ever rise and come out of it? Again, we ask the questions, how does this impact then on the mental health of people? Caste, in certain societies, depending on the caste, the group that you're born into, whether you are upper class or whether you are the lowest caste. But Mother Teresa, that was her mission, to go to the poorest of the poor, not to distinguish between your birth, where you were born. Sexual orientation, yeah. If a male decides to love another male, not because he has any choice. Gender orientation, it's part and parcel of his own genetic makeup. He just has, from young, there are a lot of studies today, and then 30 years ago, 40 years ago, gender orientation was considered, homosexuality was considered a mental disorder. So, for psychiatrists and psychologists, when they assess mental disorder, we have our own Bible called the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Yeah? So in the DSM-3, way back in the 60s, 70s, homosexuality was considered a mental disorder. So people will try and change you. Oh, why? The DSM-4, after extensive research, scientific research on trying to understand gender orientation, they removed it because the realization is that homosexual attraction is as normal as heterosexual attraction. Now I'm saying this in the church and I'm quite mindful of the scandal that this is causing some people and the discomfort that this is causing some people. But those of us in the mental health profession, if a person comes to me and says, I'm gay, I don't say, what, you are? But I've had students who've come to me to say that nobody knows. I'm too afraid. But I know how they think about gay people because they didn't know that I was gay, but the comments they make about gay people really makes me feel so oppressed and makes me feel that there's something terribly wrong with me. So I've done all sorts of things to try to find attraction. Even if it meant sleeping with going to see a prostitute to sleep, just to tell myself there's nothing wrong with me, that I'm. But I just can't. It's like asking a heterosexual person, go and love another man or another woman of the same gender, and you find that they can't. The same way as you ask a homosexual person to go and fall in love with somebody of a different gender, because it's not that. If you just Google in YouTube, there's a very nice 60-minute documentary any years ago that talked about the studies, twin studies, the various kinds of studies that talked about homosexuality. Yeah, just YouTube, 60 minutes homosexuality. I don't know whether it's still there, but you will find a very interesting debate and discussion on the topic itself. Because you will see that from a very, very young age, 5 years old, 6-year-olds, there's already a understanding, a sense of what's going on with them, naturally, right? But because of their gender orientation, there's a lot of discrimination in many societies. Malaysia especially, you see things happening. And then what happens to the well-being of that person? So if we talk about mental health for all, and we are all members of the kingdom of God and God's children, does Jesus discriminate? The Holy Father himself does not when he was asked about issues like this, right? He was so I think at the core of our Christian message is that when we talk about God's love for all, there's no discrimination. And so we have to ourselves be careful that we don't contribute to the mental illness of other people because of our own prejudice and discrimination, yeah? Normal versus special needs. So for children who are on the autism spectrum, who have certain mental disabilities, developmental disabilities, because they didn't ask to be born with those disabilities. They didn't ask to be born deaf or blind or even with those physical disabilities. They were born. And some people talk about the idea, again, this is another spiritual take on it, the idea that if you are given a child who is disabled, or the more correct term is differently able, yeah? If you are given a child who is on the spectrum or a special needs child, maybe God has a message for us, for the parents of the child. Maybe God wants you, there's a lesson that you need to learn in this life before we move on to the next, by giving us children who are differently able, okay? And so you find that most schools don't take in special needs children. You find parents, I oversee 3 international schools in the country that belong to part of the HELP group. And all our schools are inclusive schools, meaning that we do accept children with special needs children to a high level of functioning because we don't have enough resources to be able to take in any child. So we are semi-inclusive, but still inclusive. And even then, you will see a lot of parents say, I don't want this child in my class. I'm paying so much money, why should the attention be given to this child? Right? You know, you have comments like this, or they will withdraw their child from the school because the classmate is a special needs child. So when we talk about mental health, can you imagine what does that do to the well-being of that child? What does that do to the well-being of that family to realize that the child is being bullied or ostracized or not accepted because through no fault of him or his or her, that he or she has a special need? Yeah? So, question is, how does this impact? So if you can, for just maybe about 2-3 minutes, turn to the person next to you, take any one of those areas of inequality and share maybe a personal experience of something that you have had or that you have encountered or that you have seen or that you have read about how that inequality impacted on the well-being or the mental health of another person. Can you do that? Just buzz to the person next to you, to the person around you. Let's just chat for a while rather than you hear me talk about it all the time. Okay? Before I give you some stats about how it actually does impact. Okay? Let's do this for about 2-3 minutes. Okay. In the interest of time, thank you for that discussion. There was a request for me to remove my mask. I will socially distance because some people say they find it difficult to hear me. I will try to speak slower also. And secondly, you know that statistics is just about numbers, yeah? That unfortunately as psychologists, before I can make a statement, I have to back it up with the numbers. Otherwise, it's just my opinion. So it's there I will promise you no major statistics, just percentages after this, yeah? But for those of you who were lost a little bit with the income equality graph, all you need to be aware of, this particular graph, all you need to be aware of is the larger the gap between rich and poor, don't worry about the graph, just a statement, the larger the gap between the richest people and the poorest people, the greater it impacts on the well-being or the mental health of children. Yeah? Right. So let's come to this question. How does inequality in all of these areas impact on people? Before I show you some statistics on how, statistics again, bad word, on how this impacts on mental health, let me just walk around. I'll put my mask on for a short while because I'm coming closer to you. And that's why some people never try to sit in front of the class, because the lecturer speaks, the saliva also goes onto that person. That's why people sit at the end also, because they don't want to be asked questions. So I'm going to go to the end. Just to make sure that people have been paying attention. So, anyone volunteer? Any observations, any comments? Anyone? And of course, don't make eye contact with the teacher. Anyone? How does inequality, that's the question, how does inequality in any one of those areas impact on mental health? Ma'am?
Gender norm. No, during my parents' time, male is the dominant, so that will have some impact in my life also.
Male is a what?
Yeah, male will be the first. Male. Even I have 9 siblings, 6 of them is male, 3 is female. So whatever that arrangements is always the male should go first.
So the resentment that it sometimes builds up, isn't it now? I might be the eldest, but I'm female. But the youngest, they will get priority. The savings will go to the youngest, to the first male child, right? Oh, then you say, mommy, what about me? Your daughter's here, hello. You just get married to some rich man now. That's all. Bear children, that's it. That's your duty. That's your role. That's why, many families, they want to get their female daughters married off as quickly as possible. Gender norms, right? So how does that impact? Thank you for that example. Any other?
Mine is not in the list there, no. It happens in the church, okay? There's inequality in the church itself. So I'm very disappointed with the parishioners there. I can tell you that. That's all. I don't want to say so much.
Inequality on because?
The way they act. We are supposed to be humble. We are supposed to be kind. But you don't receive that in the church.
So any kind of inequality that you perceive, because you may not hold a certain position in the parish, you don't sit on a certain council in the church, then yeah, you get treated differently as somebody who has got more influence. Yeah, okay, thank you. Let me try one last one on this side of the world. How does it impact on us in what way?
Actually, I look at this topic on the rural and urban. There is the inequality that distribution of the facility, the wealth, and the development, right? The attention by the leader of the nation in the area of development.
So rural and urban, distribution of wealth, distribution of resources, yeah, and whether your MP is in the governing party or not, and if the opposition goes into it, then they get the resources, then too bad. Somebody had a hand there. Oh, okay, last one.
Yeah, another point of view for the gender norms. I think specifically for males, if you look at it from like a societal standpoint, males have always been taught to stand up for themselves and that mental health is not important. So like, you know, the sayings like, oh, be a man or boys don't cry, like that also impacts mental health in a way.
Excellent. And the pressure, even as women are treated differently, because of the expectations that families put on the male has to be the provider. There's an expectation that you leave school earlier. That's why there are many boys who they don't finish university, they don't finish their education. Why? Because they have to go out and provide for the family. There's a greater expectation that's there for them. And you know, growing up, there's a certain perception. Men, you have to be a man. Boys, so you fall on the floor and you scratch your leg and then you're 8 years old and you start to cry. Hey, stop crying. You sissy or what? But painful. Stop. After that, not only does he have a physical problem, he's got an asthma problem. Because not supposed to cry. Boys don't cry. So after a while, they get married, they become very kayu. You know, no feeling anymore. Wife says, when we were growing up, you used to say, love me. Now you don't say, I love you anymore. Yeah, because men, we don't say those things. Why did you say those things to me before we got married? I should have known better. If not, I wouldn't have married you. So yes, yeah, thank you for that example. Yeah, and so can you imagine how? Again, the point is, what impacts on our mental health? Is it just, again, the question? Yeah, is it just the intrapersonal factors that impact on us? I'm just going to leave that question with you, whether we are male, female. Is it just our personalities, that we are born with certain personalities? That's why we have mental health issues. Or is it more also that we have to attribute something to the environment? And beyond just the family, we talk about the community, whether it's in our parishes, whether it's in our towns and cities, the rural-urban divide, yeah? Whether it's in policies that are instituted in the country. That's why for those of us who are mental health practitioners, one of the roles we play is not just putting a band-aid on people who come to us for help and support. So for example, if a woman comes to you and says, I'm being beaten up by my husband, right? Because as far as my husband is concerned, he has the right to do that from the culture that he comes from. And I can tell you stories about men who believe that it is their divine right. If their wife or their daughters behave badly, they will smack them. I'm the man of the house. My right, my duty to correct you, to teach you, right? And so, woman comes to you for help, and you just I empathize with you, But after that, you go home to the same oppressive system, culture that you send the woman back to. So for an hour, she's okay, But for the rest of the 6.5 days before she comes back to see you, she goes through the same. The wounds keep getting opened up. How do we change that? Yeah, so that's more systemic. So mental health is not just about putting a band-aid and providing counseling, but one of the roles that, when I talk to my students in counseling, the roles that we play is not just one of being a therapist, but one also of being an advocate. Yeah? If you see systems, injustices that happen in the community around you that impacts on your client's well-being, what do we need to also do to try to then deal with the root causes of the mental health issues and not just about putting a band-aid on people, yeah? So let me move on, Let me move on. Oh, okay. Okay. So, very quickly, just addressing some of the other inequalities, and now I'm just going to go through very quickly a whole list of slides after slides after slides that will just share with you, show you how the impact of inequalities in each one of those different areas really affects the mental health and well-being of the people in those populations. So, I didn't realize the difference between gender inequality and gender inequity. I always thought they were one and the same. But interesting definition I saw somewhere. Inequality refers to the differences, obvious differences in terms of status, power, wealth, health, employment. But when we make decisions, yeah, that can be avoided, but we don't because we subscribe to a certain way of looking at other people, yeah, that is known as gender inequity, and it impacts on that person. So I don't give you a promotion, right? Because you're a woman. You can't do a job as good as a man. And every 3 months, if you know, especially if you're married, it's too much of a hassle. Now with the new Employment Act, you have 90 days of leave. It will be disruptive to the operations. Yeah, that's why I don't hire as many women as men. Simply because. And now again, on top of it, they want to give paternity leave. What nonsense is this? When I was growing up, there was no paternity leave. You just went to work as a father. That's all you have to provide. Okay? So when we have comments and statements like this, that's gender inequity. Because we make conscious decisions in an organization, if I'm a position of power and influence, this is then the product of what we call sexism, yeah? Which is prejudice or discrimination against people based on their gender. Not on their capabilities, not on their knowledge, not on their qualifications, but on their gender. That's gender inequity, right? Okay. Sorry, a lot of things there. Again, another big study, very large-scale European study. And the core question to this, they looked at this study and they assessed it against different outcomes, well-being outcomes. One question that was primary, that was asked of women in those studies was, would you say that in the last 12 months, someone treated you unfairly because of your gender? From the answers that they got, here are some outcomes that were there, that they discovered, yeah? That women with mental health conditions outnumber men as much as 2 or 3 times more. In comparison, women are, number 1, twice more likely to have what we call a generalized anxiety disorder. That means people who suffer from GAD, they don't know why they have panic attacks, but they feel anxious all the time. They don't know a specific reason. That's what GAD is, generalized anxiety disorder. Twice as likely compared to men to have a panic disorder. Approximately twice as likely to develop depression during their lifetime because of that unfair treatment. 4 to 10 times more likely to have an eating disorder. You know, media glorifies women who are in a certain shape. Yeah, you must be 36, 24, 33, 34, whatever. Yeah, I remember Mock and Mindy just saying, 36 straight down. For me, it is totally out of proportion. But But there must be a certain image. There must be a certain tone of your skin color. Yeah, there must be a certain complexion that you have. So much so that in the Philippines, there was one time that they used to have the skin whitening products. Yeah, because everybody wanted to be whiter than white. Yeah, from your teeth to your face to, because yeah, if you're white means, yeah, you are treated better. If you're dark, you know, you don't get the job. So when you go for a job interview, you have to look your best. You have to smell your best. You have to groom yourself. Yeah. What does that do to a young girl growing up? If you don't send boys to those beauty competitions, are there competitions for boys, you know, where they go and dress up and then they walk and dance and all that? We do that for young girls, you know, little pageants, beauty pageants for young girls. They must know how to sing, they must know how to dance, they must know how to perform on stage. When we put our young children through that, we reinforce that commercial message, yeah? That you have to be a certain shape, size, color for you to be accepted, for you to be anybody, for you to be someone. And so can you imagine if a child growing up in that kind of a society, when they look in the mirror, everybody sees a very thin girl. She sees a monster. This is what we call, the psychological term is body dysmorphia. You know, it's like going to the carnival. You stand in front of the mirror, and then your body gets distorted. Yeah. I've had clients who say exactly that. When they see themselves in the mirror, they see bulging arms. They see fat bodies. And I'm looking and clearing my glasses. I'm looking at my glasses, wiping my glasses, and say bulging arms, thin. As far as I'm concerned, you look like a bamboo stick. But in their minds, that's what it is. That's what you mean by an eating disorder, anorexia. My favorite female singer died because of that, Karen Carpenter. Famous people. And yet, yeah, more likely to attempt suicide. Even though men might be 3 to 0.6 times more likely to actually complete the suicide, women are more likely to attempt. Yeah. Impact of discrimination on women's health, continuation. Women are more likely to experience childhood neglect, intimate partner abuse, sudden loss of a loved one, and harmful practices such as female genital mutilation, FGM. Yeah. So can you imagine, when you have one of the most sensitive parts of your body removed, the clitoris, because why? You're not supposed to experience any pleasure during intercourse. That's part of the culture. Yeah, you're just supposed to bear children without any pleasure in it. So that's mutilation. Can you imagine what that trauma does to a young child growing up? Okay? And then when people experience those traumatic events, whether it's because of their gender, you know, for the longest time since the Bosnian War, rape was an instrument of war. So other than the bullets and the bombs, when the opposing army goes into a territory, they will rape the women just to create the impact of fear. Yeah? And women are the ones that are on the receiving end of this. I used to hear stories about that even during the Second World War. My mother, grandmother, aunties will talk about this during the Japanese time, how they were so terrified of the Japanese soldiers coming in. We talked about the Japanese, the Korean comfort women, the Filipino comfort women who were sent, you know, to service the soldiers of the invading armies. Yeah. So can you imagine the trauma? Why? And you only do that because you are sent there because of your gender. You are sent to those camps because of your gender. And so think of the trauma and what that does. And based on the research, depression is therefore and anxiety 2 to 4 times more prevalent in women who have partners who do the same thing on them. Yeah, who abuse them, hit them, partner violence, battered women. And when you are young, you are beaten because you're a girl. Childhood abuse, right? So we begin to see a pattern, we begin to see a picture. It is not just because of your, what we call intrapersonal dynamics. because of your personality, because of your genes. It's very much also because of the environment that we grow in, and the environment that is fed by a culture, a system, an organized way of life that discriminates another person because of the gender. Yeah. Okay. Some more stats on gender inequalities. And it again, this one is with low income, so it's not just because of the gender, but again, with lower and middle income families in the Asia Pacific, looking at different kinds of determinants in terms of health, education, employment, safe environment. Girls, and this is looking at women before the age of 18. The results, adolescent girls face considerable disadvantage in relation to sexual and reproductive health. And while there's educational parity in those countries in Asia Pacific, they were less likely, girls between 15 to 24 years, less likely than their male counterparts to be in education, employment, or training. Yeah. So let's move on to some other discrimination, some other inequality. Some other inequality, and this one is not being very cooperative. Can we turn the slide? Can we turn the slide? Ah, there you go. Racial inequality. Okay. Again, I don't think we need to talk very much here. We experience it in a country where you have positive discrimination to favor one race over other races, but bear in mind that, depending on how, whatever system is, people who are on the receiving end of those policies, one unfortunate outcome, it creates prejudice. What I would like to propose for us is that despite the disadvantages that we face because we are minority, the positive side of things is that it helps people develop a certain work ethic, that despite the disadvantages, I'm not going to use that as an excuse to be a victim. I use that to strengthen myself as a person and to better myself. And you'll find that now, you find a lot of minority Malaysians who are in different parts of the world doing exceptionally well in many other countries, because they have not allowed this to happen. But obviously, it is not just in our country, but anywhere else in the world where you have racial discrimination. The findings are consistent with what we have seen, that it does impact on the mental health and well-being of the population that is discriminated. Social inequalities and mental health problems. And here's a nice quote from the president of the Mental Health UK. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry about this. Can we go to the slide that says social inequalities? Okay, something's happening now. Something's not supposed to happen, it's happening. Okay. Okay. What do we do? Oh, no, that's the last of the slides. Okay. So when you look at social inequalities and mental health problems, it's all around us. You can't run away from that, no matter where we are in the world. Whether it's financial inequality, racism, sexism, bullying, and homelessness, social exclusion because of our age, our disabilities. What was interesting by Dr. Adaya, president of the Mental Health Foundation in the UK, often when we look at problems that exist, we often attribute it to the individual. This is what I was saying earlier. And, to those individual factors like your genes, like your your educational background or your you know, your OCD, your lack of confidence, your lack of belief in yourself. But there's certainly more to this. Yeah, we need to acknowledge the environments in which we are born into, in which we are raised, in the communities that we grow up in, because those factors profoundly affect our well-being. Those factors profoundly impact how we experience life. And of course, as we experience life, as we saw the definition of mental health, how we think, how we act, how we behave, if we have very messed up views of ourselves, of others, and the world around us, it is because of this society that we have grown up in. Yeah? So I'm just going to run through some very quick stats here. And that is, you know, I already mentioned, people who are in the LGBT plus community, higher rates of mental problems, okay? Women, and these are UK stats, African American, and this is not just typical to the UK. I'm quite sure if I look for literature elsewhere in the world, you will also have literature like this. Again, minority communities, higher rates of post-traumatic stress and suicide, more likely to be diagnosed with schizophrenia. Children with learning disabilities, 3 times more likely than the average to have a mental health problem. Women are 10 times as likely as men to have experienced extensive physical and sexual abuse during their lives. 36% will have attempted suicide, 22% self-harm, and 21% homeless. Yeah? And it goes on and on and on. Every bit of research that you will find, and data and statistics, you will see in every issue of inequality, you would see that people in those categories, research, study after study, show the same consistent outcomes. It impacts on them more than other people, right? So what can we do? I guess that's the bigger question for all of us here. At the end of the day, it's not enough for me to just say, yes, we live in an unequal world. We live in a world where there's a lot of injustice, etc., where the rights of the human person are affected. But what can we do? What should we do? Right? Because those unequal distribution are key determinants of our mental health and well-being. So what can we do and what should we do? Okay? And the answer is this. Yeah, and I'm just going to leave you with this slide because time is up. When you look at mental health equity, there are those 8 areas, yeah? So we need to talk about an inclusive economy. We need to talk about early years support for the children who are growing up, going into school. We need to talk about inclusive education for children who are disabled, who don't have opportunities to learn. We need to talk about a workplace that is just, that is equitable for both men and women, and people of different educational abilities. We need to talk about reducing the gap between rich and poor. We need to talk about a fair benefit system. If I work so many hours, I should get a benefit equal to anybody else, right? You know, whenever I travel, I go to airports, go to restaurants, and there you see, you know, all of these people working in the toilets to keep the toilets clean. You get the best service in many of these nice restaurants, etc. And these are people who don't get paid as much. Yeah, they serve others who pay them. And I often ask myself the question, what happens when these people go home? What families do they go back to? Right? What are their lives like? They work so hard. They have to smell, they have to clean our garbage, our rubbish that we throw around. What happens to them when they go home? What type of lives do they live? What opportunities do their children have? And you know, those are questions that we ask ourselves when we become employers one day, when we are in position of influence, when we sit on some committee or some board that looks at the welfare of the people who work under you. How fair are the packages that we give to them? How well compensated opportunities that they have? So let me leave you with those thoughts, yeah? And no time for group discussion. But what is it that we can do? for the mental health of the world around us, to make mental health as equitable and accessible to people. Don't just sit and listen, but where opportunities arise, advocate for change. Where opportunities arise, be part of the change to ensure that the right and the dignity of every human person is respected. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Dr. Gerard. Your talk has really been a very enlightening one. We have now seen the different inequalities that exist in society and how that impacts on mental health. We now go on to the next talk, which will be on self-care and mental health. I wish to introduce the next speaker, Mr. Eric Brian Amaladas. For the last 25 years, Eric has been actively involved in group facilitation, public speaking, and the development and delivery of a variety of people management and personal effectiveness training programs, both nationally and internationally. Eric is the director of Career Sense and Help University's Career Development Center. He's a trained counselor and a certified coach, and he also teaches at the Faculty of Behavioral Sciences and the ELM Graduate School at Help University. As a corporate trainer, Eric's forte lies in experiential learning and methodologies. His use of different facilitative tools enables him to provide an effective learning process for small or large groups. His focus has always been to help individuals and groups develop a healthy and positive perspective of themselves, their work, and their personal environment. He has also been actively involved in working with organizations, developing effective coaching strategies and methodologies, as well as providing career counseling for people in transition. So with that, let's give a round of applause to our next speaker, Eric.
Thank you, Chris. I get worried when we give you all this kind of bio data kind of stuff, it just makes us feel so important suddenly. Thanks, Chris. Good morning, everybody. I hope it has been a good morning. I think one thing that we talk about mental health is it has to be a good morning, because can you imagine if somebody said good morning and the response is, what's so good about the morning? Then it'd be susala. So my name is Eric. As I said, part of my work for the last 20 years or so, but more particularly in the last 15 years, was more in the areas of mental health, counseling, and doing a lot of career coaching in that sense. But a lot of the times, I remember teaching in the university as well, teaching students, and I remember a long time ago, the students didn't know me, I didn't know the students. A group of girls came to talk to me about the course after a class, and at the end of the conversation, one of the girls said, "Thank you, uncle," and then she walked away. And then I just suddenly realized, my gosh, the gap between the young and the old, and suddenly I don't feel so young anymore. So today we're going to be talking about self-care and mental health. So we did, with Dr. Gerard, he talked about the big picture, about how it all impacts all of us. And in every way, in terms of society, the more a society becomes industrialized, the more mental health issues there are going to be. And Malaysia is no different. As we become more industrialized, the impact on all of us is going to be as great as ever before. But today's 1 hour or so is going to be focusing on the person in the mirror. And who is the person in the mirror? I hope so. I hope it's when you look at the mirror, you see yourself. You look at the mirror, you see somebody else, something very wrong. So again, the focus is really about, it's about ourselves in that sense. Can we change battery on this? So the question is, how do we get so busy? And it's very interesting because everybody I meet in terms of whether it be counseling or whether in terms of in the organizations, you ask people how are they, and generally the statement is very stressed. Very stressed. In fact, when somebody comes and says, I'm okay, I'm not stressed, what's wrong with you? Why are you not stressed? You should be stressed. Right? And we are so busy because we're caught up doing so many things every day. We are running if it's not at work, we are rushing through our work processes. If we are at home, we are, trying to get things done for our children, and we are after school, we are taking them to classes, to tuition, to swimming class, to whatever class that's out there. Every day it seems to be a really busy time. And we are so caught up with that. In fact, that when we are not busy, we are worried that we are not busy. Why is it that I'm not busy? I must find something to do. It's like, we need to be, the story of Mary and Martha. We all need to be Martha in whatever way possible. And if we are not Martha, something wrong lah. And that's why I think when in terms of next, please. Too much now. When busyness has become so consuming, the challenge is something has to give. Something has to give. Whether our relationships suffer, whether our own mental health or our health suffers because of our busyness, that is the challenge really. When we become so addicted to busyness. And that is really something that a lot of psychologists now are beginning to see, that busyness is an addiction. There is an adrenaline rush when we are on the move all the time. So that becomes part and parcel of our lifestyle, because busyness consumes us, and the outcome of that, the consequence of that is the fact that something has to give. And so maybe the first thing that we need to reflect on, in my busyness, are there things in my life that has been taken away or I've not prioritized in certain things? So that's one of the things, And the problem is that because we are so busy and something has to give, we have really lost the sense of who we are, because who we are is people who need to interact people at a deeper level. We enjoy the kind of interactions at deeper levels. That's one. We've forgotten the things that has made us a little bit more happier. You ask any of us, when was the happiest time to say, our teenage life? Or, when we just were in university. Why? Because we got to do the things we wanted to do. Then I got married. But we've forgotten all these little things that we used to enjoy. Our simple things like the hobbies that we enjoy. We've lost a sense of self in that sense. And I think that's where we give up the experience of fully being engaged because of our busyness. So, how do we get so busy then? Because of our busyness and because of our addiction to this busyness, we are trying to find a quick fix. And the quick fix is, get some vitamin C pill somewhere. Get all the multivites somewhere. Because if I take all these things, I'll be healthy. I'll just go for a quick holiday. A quick holiday is run to Port Dickson and come back. We are looking for the quick fix. And the quick fixes, while may be good at some point of time, but overall, how many of us, we go for a holiday, we feel tired from the holiday. We need a holiday from a holiday. For those of you who have children and we go for a holiday with our children, it's not a holiday, it's events management. So that's part of the challenge in terms of what we are doing, because we are looking for that quick fix. And what I'm trying to share with you, my friends, today is that it's self-care. It's not a quick fix, but it's a lifestyle. Meaning, it's what we do every day. And I know it's difficult. Because it's challenging. And there are many challenges why we've told ourselves that it has to be a quick fix and it cannot be a lifestyle thing. So for example, to define what self-care is. Self-care is the fact that the activities that we do deliberately, intentionally, in order to take care of our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health. Right? Intentionally, deliberately. And so, easy, right? But we don't do it, lah. Why do we don't do it? Because human nature, we avoid pain, look for pleasure. Avoid pain, look for pleasure. That's human nature. And the fact is, when we go for exercise, that's pain. And so, bed, exercise, pleasure, pain, pleasure wins lah. The bed wins lah. So, by the whole notion here is that sometimes, yes, we all know self-care is important. We all know it's important in our lives. We all know that we have to do it, but we don't do it. And the whole idea here is, well, when we talk about self-care lifestyle, it's small acts of self-care that we do every day, as I said. And that's what we're going to explore a little bit. We all know about the priorities, and I don't think we need to talk too much about this, but the fact that, yes, when we take care of ourselves, we are a little bit more healthier, we enjoy life a little bit better, we achieve our goals, we are able to regulate our emotions better, meaning that we are not always sensitive and hypersensitive to everything and anything people say, because we're able to regulate that kind of emotions. Because all of us have got this thing called, in psychology, we call it emotional labor. Emotional labor is the fact that, sometimes when spouses, husband and wives quarrel, and one of them, let's say the husband wants to say something, but then says, better not lah. Let me bite my tongue now because I don't want to open up World War III. So even in my head, I know it's right. Never mind. Let it go. Let it go. Let it go. All to Jesus. Let it go. But we know we are right. No, but that's what we call emotional labor. Now, of course, it happens at work as well. When our boss says something or when our peers say something and we want to hey, no, not. But I said, it's all right. Okay? I'll choose my battles. So that's emotional labor. It goes through that in that sense. So the whole idea of when we have a better self-care, we are able to regulate it and able to think about it, to reframe it in our heads to say, okay, I'm able to handle this a little bit better. I'm able to manage my own emotions a little bit better. And I have a little bit more positive kind of an attitude towards myself and life. And so the connections that I make are also a little bit better. So yes, we know of the positive things, outcomes that come out of self-care. And when we have all that, of course, then we live better lives. We relate better. We are able to work better and become a bit more efficient and a bit more effective in what we do, etc. So we know all that, but the challenge is, what's the challenge lah? The challenge is that over time, and this is what goes back to what Dr. Gerard said, that our framing of how we've been brought up, the way we've been thinking about ourselves, has not promoted self-care in all of us. Why? Because there are certain things, there's this carer mindset. And the carer mindset, if I don't take care, who will take care of other people? No, I have to do it. It's more important for me to help people. That's our mindset, which is fine to a certain extent. But sometimes it's like a carer is martyr syndrome. I'm a martyr. I have to do things every day. I am the superhero mindset lah. I will save all of you lah. I will take care and I will save all of you. And I'm not putting this lightly. I know for those of us who are primary caregivers to our older parents, who are primary caregivers, we suffer quite a bit, right? For those of you who are primary caregivers, the stress is very great, because you're giving so much, and sometimes we need to take care of the primary caregiver as well as the carer, the caree, the patient, the parent that's really ill and all that. But we're giving ourselves so much to them. Who's taking care of us? No. But sometimes our mentality is, no one else, so I have to do lah. I become the savior of everybody at the expense of who am I and what I'm doing, etc. So that's another challenge in terms of that. Another challenge is because time and there are so many competing issues, and you and I know that, right? I mean, we all know family is important and we need to be mindful, we need to be present with our family. But when work is also, we need to be present at work. When we've got issues at work that we need to take care, we need to solve issues at work, we have deadlines and all that. But then family, how? So, just too busy lah. Too busy to manage all those things. And I need to do so many things in my work that sometimes no time for self-care lah. I've got work, I've got family, I've got children. It's okay lah. Let me do this. After my kids go to university, they start working. After I retire, then I'll have my time lah. Problem is, it might be too late lah. And for those of you who are grandparents, you know it hasn't changed. Because guess what? The grandchildren come and visit you. And you happily welcome them. Right? You happily welcome them because it brings you joy. You spoil the heck out of them, but then you go back tired. Why? Busy the whole day taking care of the kids. So again, it just gets accumulated. And that's why I say it needs to be a certain things, the small things that we do. Now, the other one is supposed to be called perceived value. Well, the perceived value, sometimes, personally, I don't believe I deserve taking care of myself. Taking care is selfish lah. It's very selfish. I don't need to take care of myself, no. That's why I got married. My spouse will take care of me. You're not lah sometimes, right? Self-care has no benefits, and that's again a very old mindset, I know that it really doesn't have benefits. But dulu lain sekarang lain. The kind of pressures that society has put on all of us today is far greater than what it was. I mean, very interesting in terms of my training processes, training programs. In the last 1.5 years, especially leading out of the pandemic, every organization is asking about emotional intelligence. We want a program in emotional intelligence. We want a 2-day program. Sometimes we want a 6-day program on emotional intelligence, which is the need for understanding our emotions is so high. Why? Because of the last 2 years when we've experienced so much of hindrances to our emotions. I mean, I'm conscious, and when we go and give talks like this, I'm conscious that we have all lost somebody or know of somebody that has died because of COVID. And that has impacted us as a society in that sense. So again, the belief that self-care is a waste of time has to change because it's becoming a reality for all of us. Another one is, it's not part of my routine lah, My day is so full, it's hard to change my old habits lah. It's really, really hard to change my whole. So we give ourselves excuses after excuses in that sense, and no one really promotes it. No one really supports it. How many of us, to be very truthful, we started exercising in the morning and then our spouse, what? Why? Why you want to go walking? Want to look good, is it? And then you go, alamak, do also kena, don't do also kena. So it's as if there's no support in terms of the people around us in that sense. And so we just have to be mindful of this, okay? So what can we do differently? What can we do differently? Now, it is really a balancing act between our mental health, our social health, and our physical health. Now, we are all unique and we are all very different. Meaning, at this point of time in your life, looking at all the things that you are going through today, which seems to be a little bit more important for you in terms of this balancing? Now, it is never an equilibrium. It's not going to have that equal thing. But different times in our lives, there needs to be some kind of weighing in terms of our mental health, our social health, or physical health. So for you at this point of time, what seems to be lacking? Mental health, am I really stressed? And what's causing the stress? What's preventing me from having those real conversations I need to have with the people I love or at work? Because all this time I've been sweeping things under the carpet and I'm not addressing it, which is causing me to think so much. Which is causing my body aches, my head aches, my shoulder pains. Is it? So what are those stresses? Now, how do we know? Stresses affect us all differently, right? We all know that. Some of us, when we are stressed, we eat a lot. Other people cannot eat. Some people sleep a lot when they're stressed. Other people cannot sleep. So one way of thinking about your mental health, whether it's already affected you, is think about how your life was 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. Has there been any change in your sleep patterns, in your eating patterns, in your relationship patterns from 2 years ago? You know, and that will give you an indicator whether you're coping well or not so well from 2 years ago. That just gives you an indicator. Just if you did make a comparison, okay, 2 years ago compared to now, am I eating better? Am I socializing a bit better? Am I sleeping better? So that's it. But it's trying to find that common balance, find that right equilibrium where we can. And it, as I said, it's not equal. That different times in our lives, we decide to choose what is it that we want, you know. So there are times when, yes, family is important. There are times when our physical health is important. There are times when community life is important. There are times when spiritual life is important. Now, all of these little things will make up our mental health in that sense. So are we taking care of what is really important at this point of time in your life? Okay? At this point of time. And I cannot stress that enough. Because at different stages in our lives, different aspects of our lives will have its priority. So at this point of time, what seems to be your need? What seems to be something that needs to be prioritized in your life? And how are you taking care of that? How are you safeguarding that asset? How are you taking, I mean, putting it in very simple terms. We need to protect that which is our assets, you know, our health. For example, I give a lot of talks, I do a lot of training, so my asset is my voice. If I lose my voice, I lose my income. So what am I doing to make sure that my voice is okay? Drink herbal tea, honey and lime, Hex is my good friend. No, actually fisherman friend is my good friend. You know, those kinds of things. But what are you doing to protect that asset? No, so if you are so busy and you need to take care of your children or you're at work, what is your asset? Is it your health? Is it your energy level? And now how are you protecting it? That's it. All right. Okay. Now, we all know that it's a combination of all this, but for this short talk, I'm not going to go into all of this. I'm not going to go into all of this, but just one or two things. Primarily a little bit of the cognitive side and maybe the behavioral side of things. Okay, just so have another... I'm planning to have it to stop around 12:05 or so we have a 10-minute Q&A kind of a thing. You know, so that'll help. So the first thing is the way we think. And we all have, you'll hear me say this quite often. You've heard the phrase, practice makes perfect, right? Practice makes perfect. What if you practice the wrong things? Practice makes perfect. If you practice the wrong things, then exactly, you're perfecting the wrong things. Practice makes, and practice is that habit, and it really starts with the way we think about what we are doing and how we want to go about doing it. So, for example, what's this word? S-I-L-K. Shout it out for me. S-I-L-K. Say it louder. S-I-L-K. What do cows drink? Very confident, no? What do cows drink? Milk. That's what our thinking does, in that sense. If we think we are defeated, we will be defeated, lah. Right? And it's our conditioning. Of course, I conditioned you in a little bit, no? That's the word. Everybody shouted out, silk. Shouted out, silk. And then, of course, what do cows drink? Milk. It's automatic in that sense. So likewise, in terms of how we think about ourselves, how we think about life, how we thought about managing ourselves, it's really about all those messages that we've been told from before and the messages that we believe about ourselves over time. And it's been confirmed and reconfirmed over time. Because we've found excuses or we've found things that will say that, you know what, that's who I am, lah. And that's how that's going to be. Life is going to be. So how do we sort of reframe that? How do we change that? And as I said, as your unique self and in the areas that you need a bit more care. So in terms of just mental, physical, social, I've given you some points, if you want to take notes, or just mental notes in terms of what are some of the things that, yes, you are doing really well. What are some of the things that you need to do more? And what are some of the things that you need to start doing? So, for yourselves, I need to change my mindset about how I do things. But what needs to happen now? So, we need to start doing certain things. So, for ourselves, in terms of mental health, physical health, social health, what are some of the things that I need to start doing? What are some of the things that I need to do more of? And what are some of the things that I'm doing it already, which then you just give yourself a pat on the back. Now, of course, these are simple little things that we all know. It's for us just to be mindful of that. So this goes back to what I was saying about our mental frame of minds. If we think we are fragile and broken, we will live fragile and broken lives. If we believe that we are strong and wise, then we live with enthusiasm and courage. The way we name ourselves colors the way we live. Who we are in our own eyes. We are who we are in our own eyes. We must be careful of how we name ourselves. So when I want to taking care of myself, I think the frame of mine is that I am important enough. I'm important enough to be taken care of. And it's very interesting that in our, when we do when we're in an aeroplane and the safety announcement comes out, and they say when the mask falls from the cabinet upstairs, who do you put the mask on first? Yeah. Put the mask on for yourselves before you put it on to somebody else. If you don't take care of yourself first, very hard to take care of somebody else, So that's a mindset that we need to change as well, in terms of yes, I'm giving and caring for everybody. Nothing wrong with that. But in that process, am I also taking care of myself? Do I prioritize me in this process? And that's important in that sense. But it requires discipline and perseverance. So we can say that, yes, I need to do all this, I need to work on this, but it's discipline. And discipline is a bad word for some of us. It's a dirty word because no one likes discipline. And so what is discipline? Discipline is action in the absence of inspiration. When I'm not inspired to get up in the morning to do that extra 2 minutes of walking or to read the Bible or to pray a little bit, that's inspiration. When there's no inspiration to do it, That's discipline. It's about being able to operate at an optimal level when there's lack of motivation. Of course, discipline is having the power to decide to do even when we all don't feel like it. And I think all of us have been in that place at some point of time, when we really don't feel like we want to do something, and then we push ourselves, and then we feel better about it. We don't want to be part of something, we don't want to engage in something, but we force ourselves to do it. We go back thinking, oh, okay, not bad, I was able to handle it. But it's not consistent. And I think that's where the perseverance comes in. The perseverance comes in. And this is a story of Mike Tyson. And I think there are enough people in this room who will know who Mike Tyson is, right? Mike Tyson, the boxer. For those of you who remember Mike Tyson, you remember his boxing matches. It's very critical to watch the first round, right? Because game over in round one. If you take a break, you go toilet and come back in round one, the chances are the match is already over. The boxing match is over because he was KO'd, the guy. Now, in Mike Tyson's career, especially the beginning, in his first 18 or 19 fights, he was unbeatable. They called him Iron Mike Tyson. It's like being punched by him, it's like you're being hit by an iron. So it's strong, right? And first 3 rounds is KO. So in his first 18, 19 matches, it was KO after KO after KO. Then comes his 19th match, and it was a fight by him and James Buster Douglas. And James Buster Douglas was a nobody. In the ranks, he was like number 8 or number 9. Way down and all that. It just so happened that year, they just went down the rank, the number 2 guy, number 3, and for some reason or other, was health issues, promoter issue, venue issue, and all that. They kept on going down the list until they found this guy, James Buster Douglas, who knew, but nobody knew. Fight was promoted, and this is true story. When the fight was promoted, James Buster Douglas' mother told everybody that her son, my son, is going to beat Mike Tyson. The mother ran a hair salon. And so every customer that came as she was doing their hair, my son is going to beat Mike Tyson. To a point where James Buster Douglas told the mother, you better shut up. I'm fighting I'm fighting Mike Tyson here. Anyway, 3 days before the fight, the mother passes away. And on her deathbed, James Buster Douglas promises the mother that he will not go down. He will not be KO'd. And so, fight night took place, round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4, and it goes up to round 6. And you can YouTube this. In round 6, James Buster Douglas actually comes down. He gets knocked down. But you know how in boxing they count 1 to 10? And by the count of 7, he groggily gets up, and you can see Mike Tyson just waiting on the side. And just as the referee says fight, the bell rings. Saved by the bell, literally. Saved by the bell. So they go to the corner, recuperate, come back, round 7, and then round 8, the unthinkable happens. James Buster Douglas knocks down, KOs Mike Tyson. Times Magazine calls it the greatest knockout in history. Why? Because no one expected Mike Tyson to be KO'd. Even less from a nobody by the name of James Buster Douglas. But very interestingly, after the fight, Mike Tyson's career goes down. He begins to lose all his fights. And he goes down the ring. Why do you think that might have happened? That, he begins to lose all his fights in that sense. Confidence issues, maybe. Other reasons why you think he went down. And not only in terms of his athleticism, in terms of his boxing, but in terms of his personal life also, everything just went down the hill. One of the things that people began to recognize was, it was not so much Mike Tyson in terms of what he did, but it was more the realization of all the other boxers and fighters who says, the way to beat Mike Tyson is to stay in the ring. Because Mike Tyson is good for round 1, round 2, round 3. That's when he's strongest. And if you can withhold, can you tahan all the blows that's coming to you in round 1, round 2, round 3, eventually Mike Tyson defeats himself. Because can you imagine Mike Tyson hitting with all his might, with all his strength, and then the guy's like a Bobo doll, keeps coming back. After a little while, Mike Tyson defeats himself. And that's when you beat Mike Tyson. You stay in the ring. You get the blows, you stay in the ring. Why do I share this story, my friends? It's because I think that's true to life, right? When we get the blows, we sometimes need to stay in the ring of life. We stay in the ring of life, and we have to persevere, no matter what. It calls, yes, for a change of mindset in terms of how I do things and what I do, that I need to take care of myself. But it's that having that discipline and that aspiration when there's no aspiration, there's no inspiration, when I don't feel like doing it, when I'm getting all the blows from everywhere, how do I maintain some kind of sanity in for myself? And that's important. And that's where motion, doing something, creates emotion. When we put ourselves in places of opportunity, when we put ourselves in places that we need to do something, when we force ourselves, that motion, that doing, creates the emotion. When we put ourselves in places of opportunity, when we put ourselves and say, yes, I need to be at this place, at this time, force myself, that fact of doing it, motion, creates that emotion. And so, let me just leave you with some lessons from this book called Atomic Habits. It's by James Clear. And if you have an opportunity to pick this, basically Atomic Habits is not atomic as in an atomic bomb, but more atomic as in small atoms, tiny, small. Now, what did it say is, for him, habits, let me see if I read this. The smallest component of our lives is actually the daily habits that we do, right? We all have certain habits. Right from the time we get up to the time we go, there are certain habits that we do. Now, the habits determine the pattern of our daily behavior. Whatever you do, those patterns, those habits dictate our daily behavior. That daily behavior then determines how we live. So whatever habits that we have, whatever in terms of how we take care of ourselves, how we're taking care of our social self, our physical self, our mental health self, those little things that we do, there's a certain habit. Those habits determine our daily behavior, and of course that daily behavior will determine how we live life. So what he's suggesting, James Clear is suggesting, is if I'm able to change tiny, small habits every day of our lives, then there's a ripple effect in the long term. That's how you create a self-care lifestyle, where every little things that you do, those tiny habits, makes huge differences. And what are some of those habits that he talks about? Well, one of it is making it obvious, meaning that you want to be clear about what is it that you want to change. What is the habit that you want to change? For example, I want to exercise more. Okay? I want to exercise. Why? Be very clear. I want to lose that 1 kg, that 2 kg. I want to be able to read more. I want to be able to spend time with this certain few people in my life a little bit more. Make it obvious and make it clear. Making it obvious means putting it up in things or places in your cubicles at work or in your fridge at home. Put it clear. It's obvious to you and it's obvious to everyone else. And if they ask you, why are you putting up this? Because I like change. Because I want to change. I want to change that habit. And if they ridicule you, no la mama, you don't do that. Why? What's wrong with you? Sometimes we need to prioritize ourselves. Okay, so make it clear. The mistake that many people, when want to start a new habit is only plan in abstract and in non-specific things. So you making it very specific. Any personal coach will ask you your goals. What are your specific goals? SMART, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, time-bound. It has to be clear in that sense. What are your goals? Make it as clear. I want to lose this amount of kgs. I want to run a lot more. I want to exercise. Be very clear in your mind what is it and what you will get from that. Okay? The second one is very important. Start with baby steps. So for example, James Clear suggests that when we think about this baby steps, we say, okay, every morning I'm going to get up and I'm going to run 2 kilometers. And James Clear will say, maybe you want to start with telling yourself, I'm going to run for 3 minutes around my condo or around my house. Just 3 minutes extra. Break it down to something that is doable. So don't start with vision of grandeur. I'm going to start 5 km, 2 km. No. 3 minutes more. I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to spend 10 minutes just planning my day before I open my laptop and all the emails come in. I'm just going to spend 5 minutes reading, reflecting, praying, meditating. 5 minutes. Not, some of us say, oh, must pray for 1 hour. Cannot. Because that's not our habit. You know why habits are hard to break, my friends? If you have a pen and if you have a paper, or in your notebooks or in your phones, or type the word HABIT. Write the word HABIT. Okay? Now, what if you remove the H? What do you get? You still have a bit. Habits are hard to break because if you work hard and you take away the H, you still get a bit. What if you work extremely hard and remove the A? You still have the little bit. And if you work extremely hard, you remove the B, what will you have? The it will still kacau you. The it will still kacau. And that's why habits are so hard to break. If you break down the word, the it will still be there to nag us. And for those of you who are smokers, you know exactly what I mean. When you give up the smoking, the it still... Right? And that is why. So it says, start with really, really small habits. Break it down to tiny habits. Don't start like, I want 5 km. Yes, you're very clear. I want to exercise. I want to reduce exercise. But don't start off with saying, I want to reduce 5 kg. Start with maybe, I want to reduce 500 grams. And to reduce 500 grams, maybe I need just 3 minutes a day to run around my condo or just around my taman, just 3 minutes extra, or just in my garden. I will do maybe 5 push-ups. I will have, instead of 2 scoops of rice, I have 1.5 scoop of rice. That's why he says, start small. And that's where the change slowly takes place. Because when you begin to do it over and over and over again, you are creating a new mindset about how you're doing it. That you're telling your brain it's doable. It can be done. Now, what he is saying as well is, remember, we need routine. When we do something, we need to do it consistently in the same hour. So for example, routine and habit, when you get up in the morning, you will notice that you already, all of us, have a certain habit, when we get up in the morning. There's a certain routine that we do. So, change that, and what you do is, in that same hour, when I get up, what can I do differently in that time? In the morning, in the evening, what can I do differently in that sense? right? So that's important. So look at the habit in that same hour and attach a new habit to the past habit. Psychology is now saying that we cannot change a habit, we can replace a habit. Meaning that if your habit is that after dinner you spend 1 hour, 2 hours watching TV, that's a habit. What you do is after your dinner, you replace the watching TV habit with something else. So during that time, you read a book, for example. During that time, remember I said putting yourself in places of opportunity. You know that if you stay in your house, you were forced to watch TV. Maybe that's the time where after your dinner, you take a walk outside. You replace a habit. You put a new habit in the old habit. And so that's what James Clear is saying in Atomic Habits. Because if you do the simple steps every day, it becomes consistent. That's a new mindset. That's a new way of looking at it. That SILK is not, cows do not drink milk, but cows, well, they do drink milk, but they drink water a lot more. You change that mindset slowly and all that. Change your habits, change your life. I've got less than 15 minutes to go. There's lots of things that we want to talk about, but maybe I'll just stop here. Are there any questions or clarifications that you may have that we can have a short conversation around this? Are there any things that you have? I'll put on my mask so that I can bring the mic to you. Has it been clear? Are you following me? No questions? No questions? No questions, then I go on a little bit more. Things that matter most must never be at the mercy of things that matter least, right? So what are some of the things that matters most to you, and are they at the mercy of the things that matter least? So again, prioritizing what's important for you. And it is very interesting, and I'll be very real as well. When preparing for this, a lot of the reflection was this, oh my gosh, am I practicing what I'm preaching? Because I think we are all so caught up in this busy addiction. We are really addicted to urgency and to get things done. And we find ourselves, I'm not sure about you, but sometimes I find myself driving a little bit faster, talking a lot faster with people. Why? Because I want to finish that conversation a little bit more so I can go on to something else. It does impact us. So again, what is priority for all of us in that sense? And self-care is also about, these boundaries. For many of us, it's a return back to work. We've returned back to our offices and such. But for many of us also, there is still the work from home aspect. There's opportunities for us to work from home as well. Now, what we're beginning to see is that when we choose to work from home, are there set boundaries for ourselves? Meaning, and for many of us during MCO time, we worked from anywhere around the house. We worked in the bedroom, we looked in the living room, we looked on the couch, we worked in the dining room and such. So there was never a distinction between place of work and place of living. Our home became the office basically. So what we are beginning to see is that even if you're working from home now, can we set certain boundaries and say, okay, I'm going to work in this specific area. It could be the dining room, or it could be in a certain place, but that is my designated work area. So my mind is also automatically now looking at it, okay, if I get to this space, it's work mode. And after that, it's all the other things in life. Why? Because that's what work has done for us. Work has said, okay, when we leave the office, at least mentally, we're saying, okay, that's the office, that's work. Yes, we take work home, but still, it's a very different experience altogether. But when we're working from home, it's very hard to make that distinction. So we just have to create spaces where possible. And I know some of us it's very difficult, but where possible, can we create that sense of an area, designated area, that we can call, this is our workspace at home. Make routine your friend, meaning that especially for those of us who are still working from home, there needs to be sacred time where you need to tear yourself out of work and say, okay, this is family time, and we have the routine, meaning that, okay, at 7:30, this is going to be our dinner time, or 8 o'clock, this is going to be dinner time for everyone. It was very interesting that during the MCO, a friend of mine who had two beautiful daughters, because their daughters are in university and all that kind of, because of MCO, they were back home and they were living there, it was perfectly fine. They ate together and all that. But once they started going back to university and going back to work and all that kind of stuff, they found that that kind of interaction that they had during MCO time was gone because everybody was doing their own thing. So what they decided was that every Saturday, as a family, we decide that we will go for sunset mass, and mother, father has decided, okay, whatever they are doing, everybody goes for sunset mass together. And after that, they will have that one meal together. Then after that, the girls want to go and do their, go out with their boyfriends or go out with their friends or whatever. That's perfectly fine. But this is sacred time. And it's become a routine. It's become a habit. So again, it's like in your own lives, in our own lives, what are some of the things that we can do that's become a routine? It's become, sacred time for us as family. The simple things that we all know it. I mean, we are all very addicted to our dear devices and phones and all that, right? Even adults. Don't talk about young people. Young people are, it's attached to them. It's physically, it's another limb. But all of us also the same thing, right? If we forget our phone at home and go to work, don't know what to do, no. Some of us must drive home and get the phone and come back. No, so again, this is an addiction. So again, sacred spaces in the dining table or specific things, this is not allowed. Which basically means that I cannot bring my phone onto the dining table also. That also leads to the fact that for many of us, the dining space, the dining table is only dining table with friends when people come over. The dining table sometimes now is in front of the TV. And all of us gather to watch TV while we eat. I'm not sure if but I fell into that trap as well. And it took us a while to say, okay, we need to unlearn this and to create new routines that are a bit more productive in that sense. Now, boundaries are also, as I said, the mindset is sometimes that we are, self-care is selfish. And when we prioritize ourselves, sometimes people might not agree with it, or people may not support it. And so sometimes when you prioritize self-care, it's just having the courage to love ourselves even at the risk of disappointing others. And that's sometimes quite challenging, because you need that self-care. Sometimes people may not understand it, and they might be disappointed with the fact. Because why? I'm taking some time for myself. And give an example. So when doing all this, and I remember I've been doing this for a few years, and so one of the practices that I now have with my wife is that when we go for a holiday or something, that for a few hours, I would go do whatever I need to do on my own, take some me time, and then come back, and then she takes a few hours on her own to do her own me time, And then in the beginning when we talked about it, it seemed okay, but then she got worried. She says, why we never do anything? I said, well, holidays, like 2-3 days. We're spending most of the time together, but let's just have our own me time to do whatever me time. And the fact for her was, well, if I don't go shopping with her means I don't support her. Then it took us a while to have that conversation to say, hey, shopping is stress relief for you. Shopping for me is stressful. So we had to come to that conversation. It took us a while, no, I'm not saying it's easy, to be comfortable in our own skins and say, okay, we are spending a lot of time together, but for that few hours, I will just go do a little bit, some things that I want to do. Yeah, maybe just go to a bar and have a beer or something, but that's something that I want to. And then after that, you go do whatever you want to do. And then we'll have to spend the rest of the time, but where is that me time? For me, it's that me time of just sitting down and reflecting about life. Remember those priorities, those bubbles, and then of looking at all those different things that I don't get a chance to think about. And for us to think about, well, hey, finances, okay. How? You're thinking of buying, for example, thinking of buying new house. How? How can I maintain? I mean, it needs to be clear in my mind. Hey, how are my relationships? I've been with my wife. We've been married for 15 years now. Hey, how's it going? It's just for me to be a bit more clearer in my head in terms of what's happening. Am I taking care of everything? And if I don't have that time, because there's no time at work when we are at work. So just finding moments in our lives that will create those kinds of boundaries for ourselves. And I think that's needful. So, let me just ask you a few questions. How often do I worry about what other people think, especially when I'm taking care of myself? Do I feel guilty for wanting to do things for myself? Good question, huh? Do I feel guilty? When was the last time I said no to someone? When did I last say when did I last say yes to something I secretly didn't want to do? Do I feel like I deserve respect or have to earn it by being nice? And when I think about saying no to someone, do I feel afraid or do I feel calm inside? And that's just creating some self-boundaries for ourselves. And I think it's important because self-care is showing up for ourselves. Like we show up for everybody else. We take care of everybody else. We are responsible for everybody else. But are we also responsible for ourselves? And I think that's important. Yeah. So, in terms of our own spirituality, I think it's needful. How much time do we spend in terms of prayer? How much time do we spend in terms of reflection? How much of time do we spend in terms of meditation and such? But again, atomic habits. 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and work ourselves up. Start small and find moments in which we can be comfortable with who we are. Here, for you young people and not so young people, and if you're attached to your phones, here are some self-care apps that are free of charge that you can download just to check, or just to help you in terms of meditation or just mindfulness, your habit trackers. Right? So there are some in Apple alone and some in just Android, but just reminders for us to take care of ourselves. And I think that's all the time I have, my dear friends. Thank you very much. I hope this has been a good session for you, and thank you.
Thank you, Eric, for a very lively and animated presentation. With that, I would like to call upon Father Philip Chua to give a token of appreciation to Eric. Thank you, Father. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, it's now time for lunch, but before you leave for lunch, lunch is going to be served at the covered car park, which is beside the chapel. We also encourage you to go to the exhibition, which is being held on the 3rd floor. The exhibition is going on for the entire day. We encourage you to go now, for some of you, so as to avoid overcrowding at the car park where food is going to be served. Okay, so if we can have a split between the group, that would be good. So that will help to reduce the overcrowding. All right. Now, soon after lunch, that will be at 1:15, will be the workshop sessions. So we have workshop 1 to 5 at 1:15, followed by the second workshop soon after that. And then lastly, we will have the forum for the day. All right. So enjoy your lunch. Thank you.